Hi, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us on this webinar, actually this afternoon. I'm in El Paso, Texas, so I'm still in the morning. My name is Al Velarde. I am a trustee for the El Paso Independent School District. I'm the vice president for that district, and I also sit on the MASBA Board of Directors, and I'm serving now as secretary on that board. Before we get started, I want to go ahead and give you all a quick announcement. Pre-registration is open through April 30th for our annual MASBA conference in San Antonio on from September 9th through 12th. Due to this pandemic, we regret that we were asking conference fee of MASBA members and non-MASBA members alike. The fee is only $200 through April 30th, then $250 beginning on May 1st. To register for our MASBA conference, please visit masbatx.org/conference. I also want to thank ERO Architects for their support of this webinar. And I want to invite our friend Brian Godinez of ERO to say a few words. Brian, you out there?
Can you hear me okay?
I hear you just fine, Brian.
Good, Al. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank all MASBA members and others who are part of this webinar today. We are so delighted to continue to be an ongoing sponsor for MASBA. We have been for over 15 years and enjoy the relationship so much. I wanted to share a little bit about who we are, ERO Architects. So I'm going to share something on my screen. I hope that you can see it. Al, confirm if you can see my screen.
I see your screen, Brian.
Okay, good. So we are an architectural engineering firm. We're a Texas firm. We've served 27 school districts, over 300 K through 12 projects. We're 100 Hispanic-owned firm. We have offices in Austin, El Paso, Houston, McAllen, and San Antonio, and have done projects throughout the entire state. Over 340 public facility projects, 10 million total square feet of design space, 300 K through 12 projects, 96 high school projects, 37 middle school projects, 107 elementary school projects, 25 career technology education projects in high schools, 55 planning projects. By the way, I'll tell you what that elementary school is. It's from Austin in just a second. 127 renovation addition projects, 14 performing arts center projects. We have evolved throughout the years, the last 20 years. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary right now, where we used to focus and still do on cultural design, where we respect the land, people, and history in our design. And then we started moving over the last 10 years towards 21st century learning, creating modern learning environments that can impact student achievement. And now we're focusing pedagogy that is linked to spaces, future-ready spaces, that have more achievement with students, more focus with students, and give teachers and students more of a collaborative environment. Give you an example, this is the T.A. Brown Elementary School that opened last January with $22 million, 522 students, a little over 75,000 square feet of space. This is an unusual design where we had a circular structure with a triangular and rectangular set of spaces to give this a very unique feel. And so this is an interior example of where the kids can learn both in their classrooms as well as collaborating outside the classrooms in single or group spaces. You can see by the unique design here how we laid out the floor plan on two different floor levels in those fashions of geometric spaces. This is a school we're also just very, very proud of at El Paso ISD, the Dr. Torres Elementary School, where we combine a unification of two elementary schools into one for 1,000 students, over 100,000 square feet of space. This is a beautifully designed and decorated from an interior standpoint school. Modern furniture with modern spaces and collaborative spaces where students can move tables and chairs around for teachers to be able to teach. This is the library area, the library commons area. This again gives you an example of the elementary schools. You can see how the outdoor inside the hallways are open with glass and daylighting and bursts of color where the students can learn and play and group together outside as well as inside the classroom. So we're real proud of this one. Again, you can see how the floors were laid out in terms of the structure of this elementary school. So that's who we are. We're very proud to serve Texas. We're very proud to serve our school districts in the state of Texas. And we're very proud of our heritage and enjoy our relationship with MASBA the last 15 years. Al, that's it. I hope you were able to see that whole presentation that I just did.
I saw it all, Brian. You know, I'm so proud as a representative of MASBA of your ongoing partnership with us, your sponsorship. Without you, we would have a hard time being able to do the work that we do. And it's just really proud knowing that we have such great organizations, businesses, and people like you who care about our mission, who want to see that Hispanics, Mexican Americans, Latinx students get the best education they possibly can. The work that you just showed us is awesome. Again, thank you so much for partnering with us, and thank you for being here on this webinar. We just couldn't do it without you.
Thank you, Al. We love our relationship with MASBA. Our heritage is Mexican American, and we appreciate the opportunity that school districts allow to carry that heritage into the designs of our schools so that the students can have and see and be a part of that heritage. Thank you so much.
Awesome, Brian, and I look forward to seeing you in September at our conference. You're going to be there, right? All right. Okay, so before I introduce our next speaker, I just want to encourage all of our attendees to make sure that if you have a question, share your question in the question box, and we will respond to those questions and answer them as best as we can. We have a great webinar today, and I'm really proud to introduce Dr. Phil Gore, Division Director of Board Development Services at the Texas Association of School Board, to go ahead and kick off this webinar. Dr. Phil Gore, it's all yours.
Thank you, Al. Great to see you again. And we're honored to be here this afternoon. I've got 3 colleagues that are joining me here in the next few seconds. It's not just me that you have to listen to. But a year ago, we were involved in helping MASBA with some of these webinars. It was a time where school districts and boards were very swiftly and admirably responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. It was amazing how all of you, as well as others, stepped up to provide services and education for Texas's 5.4 million public school students. The pandemic, though, almost immediately, it began to shine light on looming disparities that we have in education, in student opportunities. The events of last summer highlighted the ongoing racial injustices that plague our society. And we want to come back now a year later and talk about some of these things, how there may be, and not just grasping for that silver lining, if you will, but the hope that improvements can come out of this, improvements that public school trustees might be able to take forward for the improved success of all students. As Al said, I'm the division director at TASB for Board Development Services. In my role, I get to assist many of you all, and one of the privileges that we have is to partner with organizations like MASBA that are targeting areas of improvement for our students. Joining me today is Dr. Robert Duran. He is my direct boss at TASB. Not a stranger to many of you. I know he's spoken at several MASBA conferences through the years. Former superintendent in San Antonio, as well as Socorro ISD, the former deputy commissioner of TEA, although he kind of keeps that quiet most of the time. But great to have Robert with us. Robert, would you add anything by introduction of what you hope to provide today?
No, I just appreciate MASBA and these webinars. I've joined many of them, and Phil, thank you. Thank you to Jamie, and looking forward to it. Thank you.
Joining us also is Jasmine Whiteman. Jasmine is one of the attorneys in TASB Legal Services, a specialist in school law. And Jasmine, do you want to add anything before we jump into some questions?
No, I'm really grateful to be here today. MASPA's mission is dear to my heart, not just as a Mexican American, but I was a teacher for 5 years and I taught in low-income communities. Over 80% of the population was Mexican American, and it's just, I'm really grateful to be here today speaking with you all.
Okay. Yeah, leave your camera on, Jasmine. I've got a question for you just in a minute. I want to take the opportunity also introducing Orrin Moore. Orrin is a senior board consultant with TASB, and he has done a great job. He's in his 6th year of doing this work, and I'll mention, just in case he doesn't, he's also a proud new father. Orrin, anything you would add?
Thank you, Phil, and a warm thank you to MASBA for this opportunity, for engaging in these tough and courageous conversations. Glad to be here today, glad to contribute, and glad to learn.
Thanks, Orrin. Hang with us here, and we'll look forward. We'll have some questions for you and Robert as we go along. I wanted to start with Jasmine, and as she's already mentioned, MASBA's mission that is really to inspire leaders of public education to empower Latinx students and address issues of race and equity in Texas public schools. Jasmine, what are some of the challenges that the pandemic brought for school systems, and how did these challenges disproportionately affect some students?
Sure. Yeah. And of course, that's a question that, could take hours to go into the details of, but I do want to talk about it a bit today. Education was inequitable before the pandemic. Access to resources, there was already a problem. There was an opportunity gap issue in Texas and in our country just for student populations. But this pandemic has really magnified the disparities. School disruptions, health risks, income loss, those are all issues that have kind of this disparate effect on some of our communities. So I've got, kind of a list here that I'll go through of just being more specific about what we've seen the challenges are and how that has affected Latinx students. So we know that there is going to be COVID learning loss to levels we've never seen before, and the commissioner talks about it quite frequently. Just the STAR data will reveal more potentially, although there's problems with that, of course. But we have even some preliminary research based on some of the NWEA that says that average white students are going to be behind 5 to 9 months, but Black and Latinx students will be behind approximately 12 to 16 months. So that gap just widened even further. We've seen in the beginning of the shutdown when everything was remote before we even had any opportunities to have campuses open, that there was a gap in the participation rates between white populations and minority populations. And part of that was definitely access, parents that had to work and couldn't supervise. And so that just compounded with this already pre-existing opportunity gap. For our students that are emergent bilinguals, our students that are learning English, the opportunities to be in person, to speak English and to learn through the immersion, that was, especially with remote learning, was just incredibly difficult, if not impossible for our younger kids, our youngest kids. Asynchronous days when, there's no interaction and back and forth, that really just isn't the best way to learn a language. So that's definitely been just widening the already existing gap and the already existing challenges behind that. We know there's disparities in access to technology, and I've seen districts get really creative in solving this. It's been really inspiring to see, the mobile hotspot on a school bus. That's just shows so much care and concern for our students. But some of those solutions were not permanent, and we have these more permanent gaps, and especially in our rural areas where there, it really is a Wi-Fi gap and an access to technology devices gap. And that is a disproportionate effect. So in Texas, I have a number here, 66% of the students who lack internet access are Black, Latino, or Native American. 66% belong to those student groups of those that don't have access to the internet. And that's going to continue even when things return to normal. That's going to be the homework gap. Increasingly, things are going to be online. And is that just going to widen our gap if we don't solve these problems? We've seen student enrollment is down, pre-kindergarten enrollment is down, especially for our emergent bilinguals. That's an issue because they need to get into that English immersion environment as soon as they can. and there's been some delayed entry. English learner enrollment is down. Sadly, there was a push forward for Latinx student college enrollment, and that's actually had a backslide this year. 5.4% less Latinx students are enrolling in college than in the year prior. And so, we're talking about K through 12 education, but you can't not think about what that means for long-term outcomes. And then the last couple of things just to touch on. I know this is a lot, and I feel like the bearer of bad news that you probably already know, but COVID-19 outcomes disproportionately affected our minority communities. We saw that they were Latinx and Black families were 3 times as likely to be infected by COVID-19 as their white neighbors, and twice as likely to die. Maybe some of the issues, potentially less access to healthcare, multi-generational families, and so it's spreading quickly in the families. Maybe some of those families were more likely to be frontline workers and have that access to the public and in which the disease was spreading. And then, just with some of the low socioeconomic issues, we know that food insecurity has been an issue over the past year, and it's incredibly hard for our students to catch up and learn if their focus is on food insecurity or economic insecurity or instability in the family. And then our most, again, I just feel bad for the bad news, but right now it's an inequitable access to vaccines. We've seen that the population getting vaccinated right now does not reflect the population of Texas. And so it just continues to widen those opportunities for our Black and Latinx families. So sorry, I just dropped a
Yeah,
lot on y'all.
you're a real downer. Yeah, I'm so done with COVID, right? It's been here over a year. My sister was one of the first people in the country to have it. So, way back in January, February of last year. My daughter's had it twice. We've lost some extended family members by this time. It's like there's so many bad things about it. And yet, as you were talking, I was thinking of, Wi-Fi access, and it was great to see urban and suburban districts kind of taking the buses to apartment buildings. But then rural folks were saying, well, wait a minute, we don't have apartment buildings. You can't just, take a bus to our kids that live 11 miles from the school. So, on a positive note, it was great to see this expanding interest both nationally and statewide in making more internet access available in particularly rural areas. I'm hearing about, satellites and devices being launched into space that are going to help bring the internet to areas that haven't had reliable access before. Any thoughts from Orrin, Robert, or Jasmine, either one, on how these other kind of negative things of the pandemic, the increased burden and trauma that it's created in minority communities, where's the rainbow emerging out of that? Where's the rays of hope? Thoughts on that?
I think we can really focus on student and family strengths at this time and what those families did well, just an increased independence of our students. I know, I'm a parent of a 4th grader, and he was able to sit down for a couple hours and do work. And that's a strength to build upon as they learn to be a little bit more independent, as they had to be. They had to, our students had to learn how to navigate technology in ways they hadn't before. And we can build upon that to help kind of support the gap fill, essentially. Focusing on social and emotional learning, this is a big time to do that. We know that our families were hit hard and were hit in crisis, and this is an opportunity to make that part of your school.
So the adaptability, the resilience, I mean, certainly our students have gained some skills this year through this struggle.
I would also say that exposure in general has been a benefit. Exposure tends to bring about awareness, and that leads to empathy often. And when we can empathize, we can begin to work and better understand how to support and help our families. I've talked to teachers and principals just to get a firsthand account of all the things that Jasmine was talking about. And it was amazing how principals shared that their teachers pitched in, for example, when they realized that, wow, we have large portions of kids who really go without food. And if we give, free breakfast on test morning because that's important for learning, there's an opportunity to make sure that kids are prepared during a strenuous time. But it was neat to see how they explain their teachers, I guess, evolution in thinking in terms of compassion and empathy and being more aware of the inequities and recognizing, most importantly, that they could do something about it. And so that's one of the silver linings when you think about what this has exposed, an opportunity to correct it now that it's in our faces and we can see it more clearly.
Good point. Anything to add to that, Robert?
No, I just would echo what has already been said. Our educators know that our most vulnerable students and really parents are the ones that are affected most. But the bright side of that is, in my experience in working with those families, is their level of perseverance, or the kindness that they have in getting over individual crisis that may be at home. So they're used to doing this, and then also, as Orrin mentioned, the teachers. I mean, being around teachers, I liken them to those healthcare workers that are in the hospitals. I mean, when there's a need for their customers, for their mission to serve, they step up, and that we've seen teachers do that, administrators, and certainly board members. So that's one thing. Again, since I've dedicated my profession to being an educator, that I'm just so proud to see and not surprised by it, but it's heartwarming. Now, with that said, I worry about their ability to persevere, but I think that's we're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel, and I think they are as well. So it's very encouraging.
So on top of the pandemic this last year, right after school was completed for most everyone, at least across Texas, I believe it was about May 25th, we've all watched the videos of George Floyd's life being just snuffed out of him. And, that was one incident, which, if that was the only incident, it would be so different than the fact that it represents multiple racial injustices that have occurred and are occurring. The deaths of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, so many different ones. I know MASBA was moved by those incidents over the summer to help compile or to create the book Seats at the Table, school board members' perspectives on race and racism. That was a really positive outgrowth of tragedy, where people are speaking up and letting their voices known. I know that Orrin had shared with me, he has some extended but direct connections to George Floyd. And Orrin, why was his death in Minnesota so significant to us in Texas? And very specifically, what are some of the implications of his death for school districts?
Sure. Tough questions, and I'm going to choose my words thoughtfully when speaking about an issue that literally set the nation ablaze. This issue hit on a bit more familiar territory. By many accounts, George Floyd was a Texan. He spent his formative years in 3rd Ward, Houston, went to schools in 3rd Ward area of Houston. I had spent 13 years working and supporting families and students from 3rd Ward. And just quite bluntly, the situation that Floyd's story tells was exactly the mission that we hope to fulfill, in terms of, here's a single parent working hard, working to come against all odds. And that was our mission for 13 years. And that work began before I got there, but I took to it. And it went deeper when I looked at this. It was an article in Christianity Today. There's a picture of George Floyd there with one of my friends who I went to college and grad school with. And it sank in because he also did work in 3rd Ward, supporting youth there. And here's where I begin to realize why it's important for us as educators. Ideally, when we write our vision and our mission, we all think about creating members of society who are going to be productive and safe. And we often talk about preparing them to respond to a changing world. I'm beginning to realize now the most important thing is to prepare them to change the world. And if I can just kind of go close to the line for a second, let's say George Floyd didn't perish the way he did, and he was able to have his day in court. A lot of the data suggests that there's a good chance that it wouldn't have been an equitable outcome. And I don't mean in terms of receiving the appropriate consequence for whatever the charge would have been. But like you pointed to, Phil, it just highlights disparities and the lack of parity in our justice system. So when we think about what that means for Texas, I think we have to continually have this conversation about equity and have this discussion about what part of it takes place on a brown field and what part takes place on a green field. And what I mean is, equally investing efforts in the people and the folks who will change the world tomorrow, as much as we are thinking about changing the system as it currently is. I'm an optimist, and I believe that things can change. But when you push against the system and there are still thoughts that don't necessarily think or recognize that equity is a quote unquote bipartisan issue, or they tend to see it one side or the other, it's frustrating. And it makes you lose a little hope that the ears and the hands that currently wield the power are able and willing to make some changes, which is why I said before, we think about the mission that we have as Texans to educate students, not so much preparing kids for a changing world, but preparing kids to change the world. It's a good old fashioned value. It goes back to the heart of our nation, all men created equal. But we haven't seen that outcome in many of our systems. So you have to connect a few dots, but I think it's an easy connection when we think about our opportunity to make sure that, if there are run-ins with the law, God forbid, that we have prepared enough character, enough empathy, enough wisdom in our kids so that they can handle issues a lot better than what we saw happen on that just heart-wrenching video. But that's kind of my overview of it when I think about our opportunity to create people who will think differently and work to change systems and make them more equitable. And I think we have the power there with the young people that we have in our care, 5 days a week or more.
That's some good thinking, Oren, thinking about how, especially in public education, right, it's not just changes we can implement, but changes we can help students navigate, implement, improve, and carry that improvement work forward.
And I think we have to lead as the adults in the system. I think a step towards understanding and evaluating equity in school policy lets communities know that it's a thought that is present and imminent, as opposed to something that is, a second thought or not as quite high on the list of things that are important to our community. But yeah, just leading by example, starting with our systems that we can govern and letting that spread out to the community, even seeking community input.
Anyone want to add any other thoughts about the significance of these deaths and the implications for school districts here in Texas?
Go ahead, Jasmine.
Jasmine.
Yeah, so I think it's just been a huge wave of awareness, right? And people that might not have been as tuned in have tuned in. And it was so undeniable. It was so in your face. But we know that so much of the racism in our country is not necessarily in your face. It is a little bit of a plausible deniability. And this is just, that event was just, you can't deny. And so I think that the attention, the movement, I think there's momentum. I think this is the time to seize it. I think that schools are incredibly important for so many reasons, but one of them is that it's the first interaction with government that a lot of these students, Black and Latinx students, have. And do they trust the school? That will change how they feel about government, about being taught these middle class values, or these it is definitely a system, right? And it's kind of their first experience with that system. And can we make it positive? Can we teach them to change the system? Can we teach them to navigate the system? How can we empower our students to be prepared for, unfortunately, inequity, but even better, like Oren was saying, to change the inequity, to change the system?
Yeah, I wonder, and especially as the old white guy in the room, I wonder how we could help our students better understand bullying and its effects, from a young age. It's one thing in a police officer to see excessive use of force or, overreaction, whatever. How might we help our 5, 6, 7-year-olds to navigate a little different sense of right and wrong, and also, come to terms with that sense of when they're in a position of power or authority, maybe not to treat other people like they were treated when they were 7 on the playground, right? That they're somehow bringing that self-awareness, self-control, restraint to bear in all of our students' lives, so that we learn de-escalation techniques of ourselves and of a group at a younger age. Very curious how that might happen. Well, my next question is for Robert, and this is kind of a dangerous question because this is Robert's area of his dissertation and doctoral studies was teamwork. But we know that MASBA likes to emphasize the importance of teamwork among boards and superintendents. How might we do better, Robert? It seems like every week we're seeing some headline about some crazy thing that a board member did, or sometimes that a superintendent did, but how might school boards and superintendents work together specifically to address inequities in school districts?
Yeah, well, thank you, Phil. And before I comment on what I think school board members perhaps should be reminded of or focus on, I want to comment on that last topic about racism and what kids are learning. I mean, certainly we know that racism is a problem. But I was reminded when I was an elementary principal, we had a theme about our curriculum and instruction, our approach that we used, and predominantly I was in Waco at the time, and a predominantly low socioeconomic students of color in my 900 school elementary campus. It was huge. And so we implemented these, and I'm driving at a point here. We implemented these 5 life skills, and one of those 5 life skills was no put downs. I mean, so as a whole staff, we really focused on the teacher couldn't put herself down or himself down, and these students started calling them out on that. You can't put yourself down, and if another student just even put down or said something negative about another student, we jumped on that, and over time it had a remarkable effect. But the point I'm making, and it deals with racism, I think that we took pride because, some of the little fights that we were having, some of the discipline problems we were having between students went down exponentially. And it was just by focusing on that one variable, that one value of no judgment, don't judge other people. And it was an amazing impact on those kids. And I think that would be a good lesson for, a lot of schools to focus on that. If you don't have the judgment, you don't have the put downs. If you don't have the put downs, you don't have the temperamental flare ups, and just sort of that negative energy that can happen on a campus. So again, our teachers really benefited from that. It was just a matter of all of them pulling in. So thank you for allowing me to comment on that. I think it's very, very important and a good time, again, to teach those students that value of non-judgment. But yes, I do, as Phil mentioned, one of the things I do really nerd out on are 3 things really, and that's teamwork. I included that in my dissertation topic and read a lot about it. And leadership, of course, and then education. Those are my three passions. If you could roll them all up into one, and I'm fortunate I'll still be working with TASB and pursue some of those things. But I am reminded going about the school districts now and school boards in particular. I would just remind them about what is just common sense, But although we know common sense is not common practice in many cases, but that. And I'm going to refer to it, but I actually have a prop which is not like me. But I'm going to put a link to this book because this is, to me, is the preeminent book if you want to learn about teams. That I read a lot of stuff about teams, but this one sums it all up. It's a really great resource for anybody wanting to read about teams and wanted to nerd out on things like that. But Katzenbach and Smith in their book, they point out that there are 6 things that really define a team. And I just want to focus on 2 of those. And again, I'll send the reference for the rest. But that, it's a discipline or a definition of what a team really is. And 2 of those, one of them is a group of people must have a true meaning of purpose of why they're all together. They must totally agree. We're all in this. So you picture a group of teachers, a whole campus, even a whole district, the more and more those individuals can finally tune in on why we're all here, why we get out of bed every morning, what's driving us, I think is important. And then specific goals. Again, this is not really new. This is things that we teach in our team building, but I'm bringing these two values or disciplines up in my comments because I think what COVID has done, even though there was sort of a common purpose, oftentimes boards struggle with identifying their role and connecting that with student performance. And our XG research shows that there's a very clear connection. But still, I think board members, when they start talking about student performance and those test scores, they have a hard time again connecting because they're just so far removed from the classroom. But COVID's changed that. And I think what COVID has done for school boards across the country, again, it's no secret that, you know, my wife's a superintendent, so I know what superintendents and in her work with board, what they're all going through, is that I think that COVID, I would hope, the upside of that has provided an avenue or a purpose for those boards to pull together as a team. Let me just, I remind boards a lot that say, you know, we were a dysfunctional board. We had factions within our board, but it was kind of funny when we were looking for a superintendent, we kind of came together as a team. And what those board members are saying is that it's that urgency. There's no safety net here. We have to pick a great superintendent. It causes them to lay those ego differences down and say, we've got to, and they have a deadline. We've got to get this done, and we're going to lay down those differences that we have in order to be a high-performing team. So again, the authors say that urgency, that purpose, when that happens to a group of people, it causes them to work more as a team. And I would hope that that's going to be the case with school boards across the country, across the country, and with our superintendents, that they come together around that urgency and use it as a positive. Also, what COVID has done, it's already been mentioned, is that what was already a gap between where we would like to be, and that is where all students are performing at a high level, and where we are, there is a gap. And one of the expressions I like to use is that leaders, when they see that gap, they step in that gap. And of course, that's taken from Dr. Martin Luther King's comment about test of man during adversity. So they step in that gap, and that's what our board members are doing. They're stepping in that gap. They're figuring this out. This is all new. And they're looking for guidance from community members. They're looking for guidance from their superintendent as far as the managerial aspect of it. But how we close this gap now that was existed but exponentially has grown, as Jasmine and Oren has already pointed out. And I think I hope that board members are stepping in that gap and really saying our number one purpose, our number one sense of urgency right now. We have financial things we got to worry about, but we've got to work extremely hard on closing that gap at least to where it was prior to COVID. And I think if the students had a voice collectively, if the parents who have suffered the most from this had a collective voice, they would ask us to stand in that gap and say, do what you can to make that happen, and let us know what we can as parents to make that happen. And then that's sort of a segue to my third thing. I think that's important. You know, whether it's passing a bond, whether it's we've lost our superintendent, whether it's a natural or man-made disaster that happens at a district, the community looks to that board to say, this is why we elected you. You need to help us out of this situation. So that calling is there. But I would urge boards more than usual. It's the time to go out and gain what I call situational awareness now. Be proactive. Go out into the community, because, you know, when I'm faced with a problem with a staff of even at TASB or whatever, I think I know the solution to it, but I may not have enough situational awareness as a leader to say, I thought this was the path, but this is what they're really, really needing. And so, you know, it reminds me of that Gandhi story when during the movie, when they were asking about what he's going to do as a leader, why is he not doing more as a leader? Why is he just visiting with people? And he said, because I have found out the next leader of this country is the one that can bring bread. It was a bread and water speech. They can bring bread and water to these people. That's all they're wanting right now. And a lot of the high government officials are wanting to do something at a much higher level. So I think that's what is the bread and water for our community members right now. I mean, I think social media is a good avenue for that, but there's nothing like going out when we can go out and have those community meetings and really listening to them. So I think informing the superintendent about the needs of the community, I know that already happens. And for superintendents, of course, to get out there and do that as well and know the needs of the staff. So I think those are the areas that I would focus on right now, pulling together around that sense of urgency, having a clear plan, and all leaning into that plan about how we're going to close that gap and financially be stable this coming year, and then going out to the community and feeling their pain and hearing what kind of needs they have and messaging that to the staff and finding a plan to meet those needs. That's it.
A lot of great points, Robert. I want to pick up on and just sort of underscore some of the things you were talking about. One is perhaps, and I don't think you said it this way, but maybe ego is at the core of all human conflict and drama, right? Whether it's in a home or on a school board or in the job or in the neighborhood, conflict is about our egos. And God help us all, related to what you were talking about with the elementary school about not passing judgment. And at the heart of racism is a thing about passing judgment. Well, this one's better than that one because of XYZ or whatever. Sometimes real, sometimes imaginary, but that idea of passing judgment. And then how do we step up and be the solution? One of the books that we read together, 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership, that's one of the chapters is, be the resolution. How do we put ourselves in that place in the Gandhi example where you are the one passing out bread and water? What is it that people need? Thank you for everything you shared there. That was rich. Anyone else want to underscore or add something to what Robert just shared about teamwork or about how boards and superintendents work together to address these inequities?
I just love the idea of stepping into the gap, stepping into the opportunity gap and being the opportunity, right? And I think that so much, we hear from school boards at TASB often when they have other issues, and so many times those issues are a distraction. And what really matters, is that student. Why did you join the school board? If it's for your students and you really want to be there for your students, then that should be the focus. So not getting distracted, just focusing on that mission that brought the school board together to step into the gap for those students.
I was especially moved by the analogy of bringing the bread and the water. It's at the heart of what we do. We care for kids, we care for families so that they can learn. And when things get complicated, the discussion often moves away from those basic needs sometimes. Is should we go back or not versus, well, where are the safety concerns and how can we support families where they are, whether they're in the schools or not. And so I just love that reminder that the next leader or the effective leaders will be the ones stepping in the gaps and those bringing the bread and the water, meeting their immediate need. Because until that's met, like Robert said, nothing else matters. And so putting aside differences so that we can work together to bring that bread and water is the most important thing we can do until everything goes back to quote unquote normal, whatever that looks like. But I love that. I love it.
And that book that Robert was recommending, it's called The Wisdom of Teams, available on Amazon, I assume. And thank you. Yeah, there we go. Showcasing that one. As Robert was talking about kind of the board coming together, setting their egos aside, agreeing on what they're doing, there's another book we've been reading and studying this last year called The Governance Core. And in The Governance Core, the authors, they use this term moral purpose, right? What's the moral purpose or moral imperative? And we would encourage trustees and full boards to come together and grapple with what is our moral purpose? Why are we here? It's the same question, just a little different way, but why are we here? What is it that we're trying to accomplish? Because then if we can identify what that core business is that we're trying to accomplish, we can evaluate other ideas, good ideas, bad ideas. Wait a minute, does this help us fulfill our mission? It seems like, a primary mission should be of every school district to raise achievement for all students and close gaps So one thing here in Texas, we've done some research that suggests that boards that are they're governing systems that are improving in achievement, and we're not saying they caused that achievement, they just happen to be on the board while the scores are going up. But if the scores are going up and the gaps are closing, those boards report that they're doing something different when it comes to community engagement. At least they say and express, literally in research we've been doing, they express that they are more engaged, more involving the community in the work of the school district. So I wonder, as we think about governance and what governance can do, and Robert was getting into this, you know, it's one thing on social media and stuff, but it's something else to actually be out there in person at community events, talking about the good news of the district and listening to parents and patrons and listening to students. What is it they need? I'm wondering how governance may need to change in order to promote more equitable outcomes. Any ideas on that? Oren, you're a board consultant. You do this work every day. How might governance change to help promote reducing inequities?
Sure. I think one thing that we've been really talking about lately has been focus. And in my own journey as a board consultant, I tell my boss frequently, every year I come back full circle. I try a lot of different things, I learn a lot, but at the end I come back to a few basic governance principles that seem to address the challenges as adequately as anything else could, and that's focus. At the beginning of an evaluation cycle, the beginning of a year, looking at what's important, deep learning about your system, and then choosing a focus. I think the moment that we make equity and that we make fulfilling any set goal our focus, I think we better understand how to put more energy behind, you know, those efforts. We know which trails to not chase. We know which things we can let go. We understand the difference between what's important and what's urgent. A lot of things are going to be urgent throughout the year, but what's important rarely changes throughout the year. Safety, communication, understanding who you serve so that you can bring them bread and water. So I guess field focus is going to be the start of it. Governance will have to change to become more focused and more intentional on looking at data, understanding your system, gathering data from the people in your system, and then collectively as a smart group of individuals deciding what the focus ought to be for the year. And then of course being willing to adjust, evaluate that thing, and then revise as needed, and then test it out again.
Jasmine or Robert, would you add anything to that about how governance may need to change to address inequities?
Well, Phil, I would add, you know, that it's sort of repetitive of what I mentioned earlier, but I would, it's analogous to, you know, when I used to like I remember a story once during 9/11 where when the people came out and just literally in ashes and covered in ashes and were lucky to be alive, and they were hugging one another, and fortunately thousands got out of there. But there was a story about a woman was saying that what amazed her was the sort of differences that they had, the petty differences they had with people at work, whether it was racial or who does she think she is, and she's got a position and I didn't get it. And those were deep things they took to work every day that when you think about it, got in the work of the productivity, but happens in all organizations.
Yeah.
But when they had to get out of that building and literally the quote building is on fire, there's no greater urgency in that. It struck her when they were all hugging one another and embracing one another that they were alive, had those ego problems just melted away. Now that's an extreme example, okay? But the fact that they were faced with that challenge, they looked at one another and they had a common purpose. We've got to get out of here alive, all of us, and let's pull together to make this happen. I know that you can't recreate that, but our school systems right now, and they've taken such a hit, they've created an urgency like that where we've got to lay down, as Oren mentioned, the things that are not important that are important to get us out of this urgency, and the things that are less important, we need to just let those things go. I think that's important. And then the other thing that I want to mention that I thought about, somebody mentioned something earlier, is our winter guest speaker, and I've forgotten his name, but he brought up that idea of agency. That's something I've been doing a lot of thinking about. You know, because I want to encourage boards to know that just because they go to a community meeting, and I know that board members know this, and those parents aren't there, that's because they're either working a second job or they're taking care of, like my mother. My mother did not go to PTA meetings. She was feeding my little brothers and sisters at home, but I was going to be disciplined. I was going to make good grades. She was engaged. She just wanted the board members and superintendent and staff to do their part, and she was going to do hers. But going to those community meetings was not part of that. And I don't think that was a negative as much as she didn't really have the sort of agency and coach me on the agencies to go to college. She knew that I was going to go. But I think, here's my point. I think that boards should focus on those type of things for those parents and find ways to keep them engaged without necessarily being physically engaged there. And I think in helping those students with their agency as well, because a lot of the parents did not go this path. Mine didn't. I mean, they just worked multiple jobs and didn't go to college, but they were insistent that we did. They didn't have the agency to teach us how to have agency to make that. And I think that's an area that I'd really like to start thinking more about. I think that we should focus more on with those kids.
That's good, agency. The pandemic happened right after the State Board of Education and the state had begun rollout of ethnic studies courses. This is interesting. I know we don't have a lot of time to talk about this, but a good friend who's on the State Board of Education in another state sent me a news article of something that their State Board of Education did, and I think we would encourage this. So they're talking about requiring an ethnic studies credit for graduation as a way to help inform students of other cultures, people that are different than them, lots of benefits to requiring an ethnic studies credit. Well, I don't know that anybody from the state board's participating in the webinar today, but we all know folks on the state board. That might be a conversation to bring forward. The important thing I wanted to highlight, though, was my friend sent this article, and as I read through the different details, what they're going to require some ethnic studies training for teachers and administrators in the state. Here's the really cool thing. The State Board of Education members are taking the training first. I wonder about school boards and how we as school board members might lead that process, where we're not talking about, oh, our teachers need cultural diversity training, cultural sensitivity training, racial bias. I mean, you know, pick the smorgasbord of things we could say everyone else needs. I wonder what would inspire local ISD boards of education to step up and say, where do we sign up for the what's the word, inherent biases or hidden biases? Where do we sign up for our cultural diversity and our ethnic studies training so that we can model what it is that we believe we want to see happening throughout the district? Any thoughts on that? I thought it was pretty cool that their state board members were taking the training first.
Well, it starts at the top.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, not a whole lot more to add. It starts at the top. And we've seen boards transform their perspective, become more effective in any area they chose to invest time in learning. I think this would be no different. They would become a more aware, more sensitive board, better prepared to address equity in their own systems.
Yeah, this webinar series that MOSBA's been doing, they've addressed a lot of different things. They've addressed the gender inequities. I don't know if anybody wants to say any more about that. Talking about a boy problem where the girls are outperforming boys on many academic and disciplinary indicators. And is there something boards should be looking at when it comes to disaggregating data by gender and ensuring all of the students are being well served. Thoughts on that at all?
I think this is the time to really rethink education. I think we're not going to be far enough along if we go the same path that we've already been going. We know that there's a gap for all of our students at this point, a COVID learning loss, and if we don't start thinking of new solutions, we're just going to continue that same gap. 1 year's growth in 1 year isn't going to do it enough. And so maybe the way that this is a stereotype. I have 2 boys, but maybe the way that boys learn, where they're sitting in their seat for hours, is a struggle for some boys and some girls. But maybe rethinking education, rethinking flexibility, really focusing on critical thinking, and these other skills, and the flexibility of technology can help a lot too with engagement, and with being able to individualize learning. I think that's going to help boys and girls. But I do think this is the time to really, what does the research say that can really help us fill these gaps, and how do we should look at all parts of our populations, make sure nobody's left behind.
It certainly was a transformative question when it came up on my school board, where we were talking about 4th grade writing scores and how they greatly improved. And somebody simply asked, well, how are the boys doing according to how the girls are doing? And it sent an assistant superintendent scrambling through his papers to kind of pull all that stuff out. And he looks up with wide eyes and excited kind of. He says, well, actually, the boys are doing worse than before we started this new curriculum. It was working so well for the girls that it was overshadowing this big disparity that was happening for the boys in their writing. And kind of similar to what Jasmine was saying, the prompts were very driven toward a female-oriented brain, as opposed to the way most boys think about things.
Well, I think, talking about, sorry,
Yeah, go
going
ahead.
deeper into that population, like Black male students and Latinx male students have worse academic outcomes often than the female students, statistically speaking. And there is a gap there. And I don't know, this could be a whole other thing about inherent versus culturally taught gender biases, but it's there. And how do we address it? And how do we serve all of our kids and leave nobody behind?
Last word, Oren, Robert, before Al comes with the hook.
I would just take the opportunity to thank all the board members that are out there, maybe some superintendents. They're in that arena fighting it out for those kids, and it's a beautiful thing. I'm just very appreciative. I know I speak on behalf of TASB as well, but I'm very appreciative of their service.
Just echo that sentiment. Thank you so much for just weathering some tough times and being so committed to this mission of educating and supporting Texas school children.
Absolutely, and not to neglect board members and any administrators on the call. Take care of yourselves. Do what you need to take care of yourself. And, if that's a walk, if it's a nap, if it's reading something, if it's a break, do what it takes to take care of yourself and take care of your board and those around you, so that you can continue to do the good work you're doing. Al?
All right. Well, I tell you, this was a tremendous webinar, some great information in there. I was scanning through all of our attendees, got to see a few of my leadership TASB buddies out there. And so I hope everybody really truly enjoyed the presentation here and is able to take something back with you. Dr. Gore, thank you so much for your time, for leading this panel. Questions were great. And, thank you, Dr. Robert Dudan, Jasmine Whiteman, and Oren Moore. Your information that you had to provide, I think, was absolutely important, especially in this time of change. All of you who are in attendance here, we couldn't do it without you. The information is absolutely important, and thank you so much for signing in and being a part of this. Want to just briefly say thank you to Brian Godinez from ERO Architects. Again, without your support, these webinars couldn't happen. You guys are awesome, and I'm really proud of the partnership that we have with you all in MASBA. We have one more webinar coming up next week, and so I invite you all to join us, join our friends from the Texas Legislative Education Equity Coalition. They'll be speaking about our state budget and distribution of federal monies. for COVID relief, and that should be a really interesting topic there. I know there's a whole lot of issues going on with that one. Again, I want you all to pre-register for our MASBA conference. We want you to do it through April 30th before the price of attendance goes up. If you've never had an opportunity to go to a MASBA conference, let me tell you, they're amazing conferences. There's some great, amazing information to learn, speakers to hear from, and there's some good times out there. So definitely consider joining us. Remember, pre-register by April 30th, so you get the lower fee of $200. Thereafter, it's going to be $250, and you can register at masbatx.org/conference. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I want you all to have a great and wonderful day. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.